All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, Dr. Gill. My name is Philip Glenn Douglas, and welcome to my presentation on Sojourner Truth. I titled this project The DNA of an Enslaved Woman, How Sojourner Truth Transformed Pain into Purpose, because I wanted to look at the specific traits that let her turn her enslaved childhood into a lifetime of activism. Sojourner Truth lived from about 1797 to 1883. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk all of you through the course of her life, her work, and the impact that she had on the abolitionist movement. I also really wanted to showcase her life to you all. So the reason why I chose Sojourner Truth is because for me personally, Black history has always been meaningful to me, and I grew up celebrating Black History Month and learning about African American leaders. But while Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass are so just well known, personally, I wanted to choose Sojourner Truth because I feel like her story is often overlooked. I've heard of her before, but I wanted to know more about her and showcase more of her story. I chose her because I wanted to understand how enslaved women transformed suffering into a mission for freedom. And there's a quote that sums up why her story matters to me. It says that Sojourner Truth life shows that oppression can affect circumstances, but it cannot destroy purpose. That idea is really going to be the whole point of my presentation for you all. So before we get into her life story, I want to explain the framework to you all. I'm using to organize this presentation. I'm calling it her DNA. Not literally, y'all, but a way of naming the three qualities that show up again and again throughout her life. So the DNA in this presentation stands for three things: determination, never-ending faith, and advocacy. Determination means she kept fighting despite hardship and refused to let slavery define her future. When we talk about never-ending faith, that means that she believed God had even given her a purpose, and she used that faith as her deepest source of strength. And when we talk about advocacy, that means that she used her voice to fight injustice, speaking up for both enslaved people and for women. And I'm going to point out these three letters, D and A, throughout the rest of the presentation as they show up in her story. So, Isabella Brom Free. Who was that? Well, I'm glad that you asked. This was Sojourner Truth name before she changed it. Sojourner Truth was born around 1797 in Ulster County, New York, under the name Isabella Brom Free. She was enslaved to a family named James and Elizabeth Brom Free, and her first language was actually Dutch, which I thought was pretty cool. Since that's what was spoken in that part of New York at the time, she carried that accent her whole life. As a child, she endured family separation, physical abuse, and forced labor, and she was sold multiple times with no access to any education at all. Even from these earliest years, you could see the D in her DNA, her determination. Her survival through all of this became the beginning of her strength. Now, when we talk about breaking chains and finding purpose, in 1826, she escaped slavery, fleeing with her infant daughter, Sophia, and carrying nothing but her own resolve. Not long after, she found out her son Peter had been illegally sold to a family in Alabama. So she took the case to court and she won, becoming one of the first Black women in the United States to successfully sue a white man and bring her child home. Then in 1843, she made a decision that she would define the rest of her life. She left the name Isabella Brom free behind and became Sojourner Truth. And when I actually looked up what does sojourn means to travel, which is important, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because she changed her name to Sojourner Truth, believing that God had called her to travel and speak the truth wherever she went. So just like I said, sojourn means travel, she changed it to Sojourner, which means, travel, and she came up with that name. And she did that because she believed that God called her to travel and speak truth wherever she went. This whole stretch of her life shows both her determination and her never-ending faith working together. Now, when we talk about finding her voice and the abolitionist movement leader, so what did Sojourner Truth actually do for a living? Over the course of her life, I found that she worked as an itinerary preacher and a public leader. And after she dictated her memoir, she became a published author too. After all years of forced domestic labor, while she was enslaved as a preacher and public speaker, she traveled across the North, delivering sermons and speeches on abolition and human dignity. Since she couldn't read or write herself, she dictated her life story to someone else, and it was published in 1850 as the narrative of Sojourner Truth. Along the way, she worked alongside major figures like Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and Lucretia Moy. This is really what you see the A in her DNA, her advocacy. She took her own personal story and she turned it into her weapon against injustice family. Now, when we talk about Ain't I a Woman, now I want to focus on the single moment Sojourner Truth is most remembered for, her 1851 speech, Ain't I a Woman? She was a voice that challenged America. In 1851, at the Women's Right Convention in Akron, Ohio, Sojourner Truth delivered one of the most powerful speeches in American history, challenging both racism and sexism at the same time. She demanded recognition for Black women who were being excluded for both the abolitionist movement and the feminist movement, and she used her own labor and endurance as proof that women deserve full respect. Her strength wasn't a reason to disqualify her from womanhood. It was evidence of it. That speech went on to become one of the most recognized speeches in the history of women's rights. Again, this is her advocacy. She spoke in a world where that was trying to actively silence her. Now, a little historian note for you all. The famous version of Sojourner Truth's speech, years later by Francis Dana Gage, and historians debated how accurately it represents truth words. I wanted to add this important note for you all because this famous version of the speech that most people know today was actually written down 12 years later by a white abolitionist organizer named Francis Dana Gage. And historians still debate how accurately it represents truth exact words. I think it's important to say that out loud because reading the speech this way isn't doubting Sojourner Truth. It's reading like a historian. Even with that uncertainty, the speech remains an important symbol of her advocacy for racial and gender equality. Now here, Sojourner Truth work didn't stop at with that speech. During the Civil War, she helped recruit Black soldiers for the Union Army and supported formerly enslaved people as they transitioned to freedom. And after the war ended, she kept advocating for education, economic opportunity, and continued equality because she understood that freedom on paper wasn't the same as freedom in practice. This is her determination again. She understood that freedom required continued action long after chains were physically broken. Now, the cost of her using her voice, none of these came easily for her. As I read and did research, Sojourner Truth's leadership style was courageous, faith-driven, resilient, and authentic. She faced injustice directly, let her spirituality guide her mission, kept going despite rejection, and she used her own lived experience to inspire others. But she also faced a lot of opposition. She faced systematic racism, violence, sexism, even within the reform movements she was a part of, public criticism and ridicule, and the fact that she never had access to formal education. Through all of that, it was her never-ending faith that established her, that sustained her through every obstacle. Moving along, by the end of her life, Sojourner Truth had left behind a massive legacy. In 1850, she published a narrative telling her life story in her own words. In 1851, she delivered the speech that changed history. In total, she spent more than 60 years as an activist from, from the moment she escaped slavery, from the moment she escaped slavery to her final breath. She became one of her most influential abolitionist speakers in American history. She helped bring attention to women's rights and inspired civil rights movement that came after her. She represents courage, faith, resilience, and freedom. As one scholar puts it, she transformed pain into purpose and turned her suffering into a movement. Now, when we talk about pain into purpose, so to close, I would say this, family. Sojourner Truth was born into slavery, but slavery did not define her. She showed us that you do not have to be a product of your environment. She carried the DNA of determination, never-ending faith, and advocacy. And what was meant to break her became the foundation of her purpose instead. Through her voice, she changed history and became a symbol of freedom and equality that we still look to today. Thank you for watching my presentation. And my full works cited page in MLA format is included as a separate document alongside this transcript and appears as the final slide of my presentation. It includes a Natural Park Service webpage, two scholarly books by Nell Irvin Painter and by Margaret Washington, three academic journal articles by Jim Humes, Roshan Mezaduk, and Caroline Aronoff and her co-authors, and two periodical sources, an 1863 Atlantic Monthly piece by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and a 2023 Associated Press article. Thank you so much.